So before we proceed, you already know that the meeting is going to be recorded. So in case you do not want to appear on this recording, please switch off your camera. And also the presentation will be followed by a discussion part. So in case you do not want to be recorded in the discussion part, you can use the chat function to ask your questions or give your comments, and I will read them aloud. So today we have an exceptional guest at our ZEF colloquium series. So this is Mr. Kai Schlegelmilch, who is a banker and political economist, and is working in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety here in Bonn. He co-founded and he has led the think tank Green Budget Germany, FOS, which analyzes how market-based instruments contribute to a better environment and society. So the aim is to ensure that prices tell the ecological truth. He's an expert on environmental fiscal reform and green budgeting, and led several studies for various UN organizations, EU or GIZ. So for example, he advised the Vice Finance Minister of Vietnam on the introduction of environmental taxes, which were successfully implemented in 2012, and then tax rates tripled in 2016. So today, Mr. Schlegelmilch will provide a presentation how environmental fiscal reforms can contribute to development policies and eradication of poverty. So, Mr. Schlegelmilch, please go ahead. You can share your screen and give your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm very pleased and honored to have the opportunity of presenting today. Can you see my slides now?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Hopefully now, maybe.
No, you should be able.
Okay. Hold on. Yes. I have to do another step. That's
okay. Now it's perfect.
And let me make it, enlarge it. So that's better now, huh? Okay.
Yes, that's perfect.
Well, thank you very much again. As you already introduced much of mine, I will not discuss any further details, but I'm clearly here only speaking on behalf of my non-profit activity with Green Budget Germany. So don't confuse it with my professional life at the Federal Environment Ministry. The overall aim is really to inform you about this aspect of fiscal reforms, and in order to see whether we have opportunities of cooperation, of making joint proposals and projects and studies. That is the overall aim. That's why I mention now, so that you better can follow and see what is in the presentation for you. And I discussed already with the co-hosts that I will run through the presentation in one go, and afterwards we will only discuss. This may be just due to this format of the Zoom, and because it's easier to do it this way than interrupting all the time and trying to get you in. But please note what you find interesting, and we'll be happy to discuss all the details in the second half of the presentation. Okay, right. This is the objective and structure of this presentation. First about me a bit more in Green Budget Germany, and then running through the promising approach of Green Budget Germany, looking at the experiences that we made with different policy researchers. And then I would be very happy to learn about your experiences and similar works, and the cooperation possibilities, as I said already. Well, I'm back-end political economist, trained in Frankfurt, Main. I've been spending 25 years of my life on these issues of fiscal reform, and worked 21 years in the Federal Environment Ministry. But already 26 years ago, I founded this Green Budget Germany because I found we need a platform, an expert platform, and that's why I engaged there. But I did a lot of side jobs for UN organizations, for the EU, for GIZ, for DANIDA, AFD, not the German party, don't get confused. It's the Agence Française de Développement. By the way, I'm living just 10 minutes away by bike from your ZDF, so meeting is easily feasible. Maybe in other times it's easier, but anyway, outside it'll always be possible to meet you. So no problem to meet personal as well. Let me introduce you Green Budget Germany. It's formerly an association and Verein, as we call it in German. It's a think tank where we have a lot of economists, but also other experts. We do provide a network of experts on fiscal and environmental research. We do policy consultancy for a sustainable economic order. And it's a forum in the classical sense, a space for political and economic discussions from which positive impulses emerge. And it's a not-for-profit environmental organization, and thus depending completely on third-party financing. We have done many analyses and advise several countries how to design and implement elements of environmental fiscal reform. And as we not only engage worldwide, but also on European level, we thought from 2008 on, we founded Green Budget Europe. So to have also a discussion platform on European level. And this went very well for more than 10 years. But for the last 1 or 2 years, we realized we have to downsize again a little bit. And we are integrating our platform in the European Environmental Bureau, which is the European platform for environmental organizations. We are a team of at least 10 people and a lot of interns as well, including Jacqueline Cottrell, whom I present here because she's our associate at Green Budget Germany. She's of English native, so she speaks fluent English, but also German. And she does do all our international activities from the very beginning, so for the last 20 years, just to present her as our most important team member in Green Budget Germany on that. She's not living in Germany no longer. She used to live there. She's in Scotland, but excellent cooperation for all these years. And in nowadays times, well, it doesn't matter anymore. Right, coming to the second item, presenting the promising approach of Green Budget Germany. Well, in a market economy, prices need to reflect the full costs of all our actions. Otherwise, there will be distortions, misallocations, and inefficiencies with substantial damages to the people, markets, and environment. Prices should thus tell the ecological and social truth. All environmental and social costs need to be paid by the polluters or the resource users. This is the fundamental principle of our market economies. And if it is not followed, well, you see what can happen. With the German Democratic Republic, for example, there you didn't have to follow the principle of that everybody has to pay the full economic prices and costs. And these costs also includes all external costs, which are so far not borne by them, by the polluters, by the resource users. And two important elements of how to make them pay are environmental taxes and charges, and the abolition or the phase out of environmentally harmful subsidies as major elements. This is overall a very attractive approach, since money sources are always very welcome by everybody. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing or whatever political aspect you like to highlight, but in the end, you need to finance your activities. And that's where we come into play, because we provide opportunities how to finance these activities. And that's why it is quite attractive to many of you. Let me make you familiar with more details of that approach. Budget and tax policy tell the truth about your priorities, not political proclamations. So whatever politicians say on Sundays, what they would like to do, what they intend to do, well, you can believe them to a certain extent, but in the end it counts what you put into the budget, because this reflects your real priorities. So you could say in short, tell me what you tax and what you spend, and also what you don't tax and don't spend, and I will tell you what your true objectives are. Let me give you concrete examples. What does it mean internalizing externalities, or these hidden costs? Well, sorry, technical problems. Yes, no. Externalities are which are caused by polluters and resource users are not borne by them. But this is against the basic principle of the market economies, as I said before. What we need to do is internalize these calculations into the calculation and the bills of the polluters and the resource users. And you see what kind of costs are there. It's the poison from waste, for example, the air pollution and the health damages to the people, because they get affected, they get ill, they can't work anymore that nicely. And also all the transport issues, they bring about a lot of environmental pollution and resource use. So this has to be integrated into the calculation of the resource users. Now, I'm talking about environmental fiscal reform as a major solution to that. It comprises ecological tax reform meaning we look at increasing taxes on activities harmful to the environment. You see this in the red arrow here. But on the other hand, we would like to reduce taxes on activities not harmful to the environment, like labor, for example, meaning you have more money in your pocket because you get less reduction from your labor, from your wages. And including the subsidy reform as well, this all together gives the environmental fiscal reform. You can also call it in brief, tax bads, but not goods, because you would not like to punish people because they work hard, and then you shouldn't tax the wages too high, but rather the other way around. Those who pollute the environment, they should be taxed high. They should pay their share, fair share, sorry. Or a nicer slogan, which was also a nice rhyme, tax what you burn, not what you earn. This means pricing public goods. So you put a price tag on your public goods, for example, whenever you use it. You put a price tag on the ecosystem services that you use. Ecosystem service, what is it? Well, if you go into the forest, you enjoy an ecosystem service from nature because you can relax, you can breathe wonderful fresh air, you can benefit from the water storage of the forest, and there are many more examples of these ecosystem services that nature provides to us, but what we hardly pay for normally. And that's what we try to give a price to these services from nature, because then people are much more willing to pay for it and to acknowledge what nature is giving to us. So it's a kind of investment in these public goods. And let me get you more details on these environmental fiscal reform elements, EFR standing for Environmental Fiscal Reform. What you see is that we have a lot of different instruments like taxes, like subsidies, but also tradable permits or allowances nowadays, emission allowances, like with the European emission allowances systems, but also fees and border tax adjustment. The European Commission is working now hard on implementing a border tax adjustment. This means that commodities coming into the European Union will be taxed according to what pollution they have been caused during the production process. And this provides then a level playing field between the various countries and the different companies, which makes it better for those who want to go ahead with such instruments, that they are not worse off in terms of competition, which is often very crucial for many companies. Now, the results of an environmental fiscal reform, if properly designed and implemented, you get welfare gains, you get a greener economy, and this pays back in all three areas: environment, economy, and social aspects. In the environment, you have less pollution and waste. You have better resource efficiency. In the economy, you have a lower externalities and more internalized externalities. So prices tell the truth, the ecological and the social truth. You have also a stimulus for technological modernization and innovation, very important nowadays, because you need a driver in what direction your innovations should go, your technical progress. And you have an improved fiscal system because you have less market distortions. Because in the end, we all have to pay the bills we do not want to pay now, but all the externalities pay back. We see climate change, for example, as a major challenge for us, which we will have to pay the bill at the end. And therefore, it's better to pay now than instead in a few years and decades. You may know the Stern report about 10 years ago, which nicely demonstrated how that it is better to invest now, to move now, and to do action now than 10 or 20 years later, when we already have much higher damages, which cannot always be repaired. So that is what I mean by welfare gains in the economy as well, and also socially. There are lower work costs and higher employment, therefore, and we can use the money for poverty alleviation. So that's also very important, that there will be money available by more taxes, more subsidy reduction, and these can be used for the poverty reduction. Let me introduce you in some more details of the environmental taxation and the double dividend in action. Some even call it triple dividend. You will see in a minute why. Well, what have we been observing for the last decades? There have always been rising labor costs. They have been increasing all the time. You see this without going into detail very nicely here, that they have been increasing substantially. So you see, we started with, let's say, 1 or 2 euros per hour in 1969, and now they are more than 30, 40, 50 euros per hour. So substantial increase on the one side. On the other side, we have seen, and this goes back to, believe it or not, 1845. So that's 160, 70 years old now. The commodity prices have been falling since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the future will show if the recent price increases will sustain. Well, I refer to the year 2000 when the prices peaked a little bit, but it's been going down again as well. And these indeed are the long-term signals that the markets and also the economies and the entrepreneurs and the households, they follow these price signals in the long term. And also our structures in the infrastructure. We do not build streets and houses just for 5 or 10 years, but we build them for almost eternity. Look at the habitats we have, the towns we have. They expand all the time, and therefore these are real long-term effects that are triggered by these price effects. Now going to the tax issue, more detail. How does the, and I forgot a slide I realize now anyway, how does the state get the revenues? It needs to pay a lot of bills for the schools, for kindergarten, for universities, for institutes like you, for my ministry, and so on. So the state needs to get revenues. And the major revenues it gets not from environmental taxes as you might think. You see here the slide, it's 2 to 3%, that's almost nothing. The major pillar is on labor costs. So about 60% of all revenues are stemming from labor revenues, from labor taxes. A minor part, about 10%, is from capital taxes, another 10% from value-added taxes, and you see the environmental tax revenue adds only about 2 to 3% to the overall GDP. The highest rates are from Denmark, Netherlands, Slovenia with more than 3%, but there are also some countries at the lower end, at least in the European Union here, Spain, France, Lithuania, Romania, and Slovakia, below 2%. So that's almost nothing. And back in the year 2008 and 9, remember there was the fiscal crisis, the financial crisis, when the world was struggling. How do we get additional revenue so that we can pay for all the stimulus programs the different finance ministers launched at that time? And then we did a very interesting study to demonstrate the finance ministers, look, if we do not tax income, but we tax environment issues, environmental consumption or energy taxes particularly, if we tax these, then they have an overall much better macroeconomic impact from these taxes, because they do not harm the economy as much as they are harmed by income taxes, for example. That's what these charts show without going into detail. I think that's not worthwhile here. We can still discuss, but I can show you the studies where they are on the website. But that's the main message from this job. And of course, this was very attractive to finance ministers because they had to make a decision, okay, I need to refinance all these billions of euros I spent for the stimulus programs. And how do I do it? I can cut some subsidies, but in the end, I need to increase some taxes. And that was our message. And we had Hans Eichel, maybe some know this name. He was the former finance minister for 8 years in Germany between 1999 and 2005. And together with him, we went to several finance ministries and showed them these charts and analysis, and they were very happy. And indeed, Spain, for example, went this way and they increased some of the environmental taxes. So it can be very useful. Next slide is now on the actual crisis we face. You may know that many countries are spending billions of euros now in order to cushion the corona crisis. And as we would like to see it, accelerate the ecological transition, because we can spend the money only once. I mean, these dozens of billions, it's unbelievable. We never thought that we would ever spend so much money in such a short time. But now the crisis is there, but with every crisis, there's a big chance as well. And that is, I think, accelerating the ecological transition. Now, let me give you some details. The governments are now forced to do emergency aid spending. That had been done already in the springtime of this year. and these are far-reaching economic measures of historic dimensions. And we see now that the government is even considering additional packages of spendings. But I'm sure this will not be able to be continued like this forever. Of course not. I mean, also money is not eternal. And there comes the new opportunity now. How do the finance ministers finance all these first two measures over time? Because they cannot spend and do it by debt increasing over time. And that's why I think we need additional financing measures. And we must not repeat the mistakes of the past the financial crisis we had. And that's what I said already before. We need to resolve several crises at the same time because we don't have the money to do it one after another. So solve the corona crisis at the same time as the climate crisis and possibly further crises like social injustice we have in the society. And this applies even more so for many so-called developing countries. They are hit hardest often by climate change, for example, and they hardly have any resources to pay for those changes we now see. Now, what are the lessons learned from the economic stimulus programs after the financial crisis? Well, as I said before, it's an opportunity and risk. They often bring radical change and trend-setting decisions, both positive and negative. Now is no more time for another postponement, and the economic recovery and the climate protection can and must go hand in hand this time. I'm jumping a little bit because I'm repetitive, I realize. Now, what are the lessons learned, as we know already from the Greek Hippocratic oath saying, for those of you who still know Latin, primum non nocere, secundum cavere, tertium sanare. First, do not harm. Secondly, be careful. And thirdly, heal. And a good approach, therefore, attempts to think of short and long-term challenges together. So when dealing with the acute and short-term effects, not to lose sight of the requirements of long-term transformation tasks and to have potential synergies between the different objectives. Health issue is important because the measures reduce the number of new infections and strengthen the health system. That is, of course, the first priority. But also the emergency aid for employees and companies. Measures provide short-term support for employees, households, and companies to cushion social hardship and economic downturn. And this is a very delicate balance, as you can imagine. We all realize in our everyday life now. But the third synergy comes with the green structural change. Measures steer the economic relaunch in the right direction and promote sustainable structural change. That's what we aim at least at Green Budget Germany, and I think also at CEF. What other potential synergies can be identified? Thinking about tomorrow means, above all, keeping an eye on green structural change. Without it, we will not achieve any climate protection or development goals. Let's face it. And we have the Agenda 2030 in front of you. I mean, 10 years is nothing in terms of long-term development. We consider now massive public spending in the context of combating the corona crisis and as investments in the future, and use it to prepare companies and employees for structural change, to accelerate it and thus combine economic opportunities and climate protection. Following will now be some examples of responses to the corona crisis in Germany. Well, one important element is that we avoided negative aspects of environmental taxation or environmentally harmful subsidies and some positive negative aspects. Because before, in springtime in Germany, there was the adoption of the stimulus package, there was a general car purchasing bonus discussed very seriously, as it was offered after the financial crisis. And we fought hard to avoid this stimulus because this would have incentivized more car purchasing, which from an environmental perspective, we would not like to see at all. And fortunately, this did not materialize. We lobbied hard to make this not happen with several studies and talks to ministers and so on, and also discussing with Angela Merkel. And fortunately, she has a good sense of what makes sense and what does not make sense, and from learning from his history. So in this sense, this was already positive to avoid environmentally harmful subsidies. And this can be considered as a great success. But let me get you more details of this Germany recovery plan. I don't go into detail here. You can have the presentation afterwards. So as a hint to my colleagues, you can convert it into a PowerPoint or convert it into PDF and put it online if you wish. This Germany recovery plan has many details in there. Most of them are environmentally okay. Some are not good, but that's just marginal. You see the red ones and the yellow ones. They're not always positive, but the most are positive. So in this sense, we are quite, yes, positive on this economic recovery plan. Let me give you some details, just an excerpt. There was the reduction of the general value added tax from 7 to 5% and from 19 to 16% between July and December this year. You also benefited personally from that, so congratulations. But however, environmentally friendly products benefit in general, but there was no demand shift effect since all products benefit equally. What we would have appreciated that environmentally benign products benefit more than other products. However, this did not come true. And also there was no accelerated depreciation for energy efficiency. Companies, you must know, love to have depreciations and accelerated depreciations for whatever, because then they can claim more costs when they have to calculate their taxes they have to give to the state. This did not come true. This is negative, of course. And also, there was not much done on environmental taxation, only marginal changes. And even worse so, if you think about Lufthansa, our large company, our large airline, but also others like TUI, they got a grant of more than 10 billion euros. And now it's under discussion that they get another 2 billion euros because it's not enough for them, apparently. But the main problem is that there's not even an environmental condition made to that. So you could link it to an environmental condition, arguing, okay, you get these subsidies because we want a national airline to survive. But, for example, they could ask that there would be no further internal domestic flights in Germany from Lufthansa, because there are excellent excellent train connections with the ICE train, as you may know. So this could have been a condition, but it was not made. So this is negative in this sense. But at least the annual road tax will be fully based now on CO2 emissions, while it's only been on 50% until now, and the other 50% were on the engine size. However, this applies only for the new cars from this year on, I think, this year or next year, well, anyway, but not for all the existing cars which are on the road now. What are the conclusions? The stimulus package was environmentally partly positive, partly we missed some opportunities. At least no worst case scenarios came true that car sales were particularly promoted by this program. There are still some hopes and efforts on further stimulus packages, which may be better even, and later the counter-financing of all these massive expenditures for which environmentally harmful subsidies and environmental taxes should be applied. This is still there, but likely it's not going to happen this year, but this will only come true maybe next or in the next 2-3 years' time. and maybe only after the next election. You may know in Germany we have elections forthcoming in autumn next year, and likely then in the new coalition this will be agreed how to finance all these debts. Coming to the next part, which is still the last part from me, I'm going to present our experiences with regard to development policy research. Development policies with the aim to eradicate poverty often lack sufficient financing for effective implementation. I'm sure you know this problem very well. In addition, environmental problems often hit the poorest hardest. And that's exactly where Green Budget Germany's approach, our two elements of environmental fiscal reform, come into play. Because they can contribute to the simultaneous solution of both, or reduction of both, let's put it this way, a little bit more diplomatic. By abolishing environmentally harmful subsidies and introducing environmentally related taxes, both challenges can be addressed and partly solved. This has been formally approved now with the 2015 Addis Ababa Action Agenda on financing for development, but also the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, because it's explicitly in there that negative incentives should be abolished, and the financing for development is exactly about how can we generate more resources in those countries we aim at with our policies. Now, what are our experiences? The financing for development and the Sustainable Development Goals have set an important framework for the direction of research and policy advice. Now, it officially backs our agenda, which we've been following for now 26 years. And what we would like to do is do more joint research with you, with other institutions. We'd like to contribute to others' research with the particular approach as value added. So we try to bring in our value added in terms of how could we finance your proposals, what you would like to implement in so-called developing countries, in other countries. And we would like to join application processes on that topic. So that's what I'd like to discuss with you. Giving you some insights about the studies and publications which we did. We looked at environmental tax reform in developing, emerging, and transition economies in a very broad way. We worked together with the German Development Institute, which you may know, just across the road, basically. So we have good connections with Tilman Altenburg, for example. My colleague Jacqueline has been writing a nice study on climate of fairness, how environmental taxation and tax justice helps in developing countries. We've done a lot in Asia and the Pacific region for UNESCO, for example. You see this study there. But we've done even more in Indonesia. On a national level, I've done a study there myself. And then with colleagues, we looked at Jakarta particularly, how air pollution from road transport in cities can improve, I have to start again. How fiscal policies can address air pollution from road transport in cities and improve health at the same time. And the last bonus I have for you is we even have developed a full set of training on environmental fiscal reforms, which we have applied. Well, half days can be done, but that's just a teaser maybe then. But we've done it in a 1 day or up to 5 days, full set of training where we learn people from finance ministries, from environment ministries, other institutions, how they can implement these tools in their various contexts. And this is a very hands-on training. So we've done it together with GIZ very much. I think this is very useful, and we'll be very happy to apply this also in other countries or together with you so that you get a better feeling about that. Or if you have groups being invited to here to Germany, that's the easiest we could do here. So thank you very much for your attention. I forget about the first sentence. And thanks for listening. And we're looking very much forward to the discussion right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. I think that the ZEF community is definitely very much sensible to environmental and sustainability issues. And I'm also sure that most of us will be interested in discussing with you how your ideas about this green accounting and taxing environmental externalities could be implemented or adapted to the very different context of developing countries and their very different, usually tax regimes. So let's open the floor for the discussion. If you have any questions, either raise your hand, or you might also use the chat function, and I will read then your comments. Maybe in the meantime, I will just ask my question so far. So how would you see exactly the potential or opportunity to tax environmental externalities in case of developing countries, where usually these environmental externalities are much more difficult to capture, to measure, and where also, as I said before, the tax regimes are very different from what we have in Europe, and also where we see a lot of informality in economic activities. So how we could address these environmental externalities in this specific context.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, developing countries have a much larger informal sector, that's true. But that's actually a big opportunity, because how can you gather income taxes from all these people? Are they registered? Likely not. At least the finance minister doesn't have its hands on to get the money from all those people. So it may be much easier to tax one tanker coming in with a lot of oil or coal. And that's easier to control, to manage simply, than taxing income from labor. So this is one of the items, how you could tax that much easier. Of course, you cannot measure in detail the externalities in the so-called developing countries. Yes, that's for sure. But there's enough certainty to go in the right direction with taxing those air pollutions or those resources, that you are not wrong. It goes really in the right direction. We are far away from having a full internalization of external costs, not even in Germany, as much as we may be considered a good guy, but well, anyway. So it doesn't matter that you cannot calculate in detail. It's going in the right direction. That's the important message, the important guideline you need. And yeah, well, that's the main message to your answer, if it answers your question, I hope.
It does, thank you. And I think it might also go a little bit in the direction of these international relations and international trade, international investors who very often are polluters in developing countries. And maybe my colleague Lucas would like to ask a question related to this, or maybe not, but Lucas, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this presentation and for the interesting evaluation of the environmental impact of the new recovery package. I think I have one set of questions regarding your slides in Germany, and then one maybe bigger question on developing countries. So on the German taxes, what you mentioned as environmental taxes, could you briefly say what taxes you include there? I noted on the slide that you made a distinction between indirect and direct taxes already. I think from an economic perspective, labor taxation is always inefficient. I think it's difficult to argue that some taxation is better than labor taxation. So that's pretty much known, but still we do it because we need the tax revenue. It's interesting that you find that the value added tax reduction has not had an impact on, I mean, from an environmental perspective. I would like to know if there is no income effect into higher meat consumption, for instance, because generally there is more disposable income if taxes go down. And so the bigger question for developing countries is probably, from a development perspective, we know that cheap energy is really important to drive an economy, to let a country build infrastructure. So what do you tell these countries that have not polluted a lot in the past, but now we tell them you should tax your oil consumption because we have messed up in the past. So so that's really difficult for maybe the development of those countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for this question. These questions, yes. On the first one, yes, of course, you are right. Of course, the value-added tax reduction has had an impact for sure on the consumption overall. My main point was, and it's, yeah, it promotes, of course, the consumption overall, yes. So resource consumption is in tendency indeed increased, which is not positive from an environment perspective. But let's face it, I mean, in this crisis, this is not the first priority we're looking at, but we try to combat the crisis and the economic crisis and the health crisis. So that's something we have to take into account for half a year time, that now the VAT has been reduced, but it will be increasing again. So in this sense, also likely meat consumption, other consumptions have been increasing. And you have seen a substantial impact on the whole way people buy and behave, you know. The hotels, the restaurants, they have all been shut down more or less. They have reduced turnover. On the other hand, you see the wholesale markets, they have boosted their turnovers because people go more and more in these stores. They cook themselves and so on. So a substantial shift, a structural change, which is not easy for an economy to cope with at such short notice, you know, because structures build up over time. And now these structures are ruined in a very, or reduced, changed in a very short time, which is always difficult because you have done investment and you need a payback of the investments. So it had an impact, of course, yes, but it didn't have a positive impact in the sense that we would like to see environmental products being favored by such a tax reduction or by punishing kind of bad products from an environmental point of view by higher taxes. So I was a bit too rough maybe in this description. On your second question, what do I tell those countries? Well, you're in a lucky situation because you didn't waste money yet building up wrong infrastructure. Because these infrastructures for gas, for fossil fuels, for oil, for coal, they are not sustainable in the long term. So don't build it up now, but jump directly to the green infrastructure of the future, renewables, efficiency. Yes, that's the way forward. So that's where you should put your money in, and then you get a leapfrog effect because you will be the ones leading in this position, whereas the others, they spent already, they wasted their money in the old infrastructure. So that's the kind of message I would try to convey to them.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Lucas, for the question, good questions. And thank you, Kai, for this interesting answer. We also have a question from Abdul Rashid. So let me read it out. How do you incorporate distributional tensions arising from environmental taxes, where often the poor struggle to cope with higher prices?
Very good question. That's absolutely justified. Thank you very much. The point is that most environmental taxes in poorer countries, in developing countries, they rather hit the middle class and the upper class than the poor ones. Simply because they don't possess a car, they don't use a car, and most of the energy is used in the transport sector in those countries. Whereas a bus, for example, if poor use a bus, of course, it also has a slight impact on the ticket price of the bus. But actually, this is really marginal. And so the poor will likely not be hit really by those tax increases. Whereas the middle and upper class, they have luxurious cars, they drive a lot, they fly around, they will be hit much more by those taxes than the poor ones. And it is a very interesting misbelief and myth that the poor are hit harder by environmental taxes than the richer ones. And actually, this has been abused very substantially in India, for example, by the richer ones, because they argued when the carbon tax was introduced 1, 2, 3 years ago, oh, this will hit the poor ones very badly. But in fact, this was just a fake argument, a fake attempt to prevent these subsidies to being abolished, because the poor would not be hit, but in fact, the richer would have had to pay much more. And that's what they tried to prevent by pushing the poor as an argument in front of them. But this is not true at all. So there are many studies indeed showing that the poor will not be really hit. It may be a little increase, yes. So don't get me wrong, it's not black and white, but it's gray shadowed. And there's a light shadow maybe for the poor ones, but clearly the high contribution will be from the middle and upper income classes that have to pay those energy taxes, because they use most of the electricity, of the fuels, of the transport fuels. So that's the real story behind. But it needs a communication strategy very clearly, because you will discover that very soon that the upper and higher classes will easily abuse this argument, because it's easy for them. They have the power, they have the money, and they will employ people with a nice communication strategy. So you have to develop a good communication strategy, have studies behind demonstrating that this is not true, what they will argue, and then you can challenge that a bit.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, let me follow up maybe on what you were saying about a little bit about this political economy aspects, because as you said, you are a political economist yourself. What's your experience exactly regarding discussing or negotiating tax reforms, environmental tax reforms in developing countries, where, as I said, probably a big chunk of this environmental pollution is caused by maybe foreign investors, or maybe is somehow included in exports, etc. And at the same time, such international companies very often have huge negotiating power compared to governments. So what's your experience with these political aspects?
Thank you for this very important question as well. That's true, that's not easy. But what I think Vietnam, for example, has been introducing as well, is that companies have to deposit money when they want to invest, in order to ensure that any damages they may cause during their construction and operation of a plant can be healed, can be compensated by this money. So they have to be liable in the end. And I mean, what is happening worldwide now, more or less in the same pace, is that countries get more aware of countries that they don't let companies away with damages, but they have to pay for them. And in this sense, they can also make clear that it is important for the investors that they get the right incentives to really, if they exploit some mines, for example, some resources, that they still have the incentive to do it in a proper way and to pay their fair share, and also to contribute to the what's it called, the IET, the extraction industries agreement. I forgot the exact name, sorry, you may know what I mean, to unveil what are the sources of payment to the government, to prevent also corruption. Yes, that's a very important element. So the companies should be happy that they pay certain taxes and they have a fair negotiation basis for their investment in these countries. And let me get back to the other question again from Lucas on a nice tax, which is basically hitting only the high income people, which is an air ticket tax, for example. It hits the tourists on the one hand. Well, hits, that's far too hard. It will be paid by the tourists and those people who fly, who can afford flying. That's definitely nothing for the poor. So why not start with such an instrument? And several countries have done that already. And so that's also on the agenda of the Ministry of for International Cooperation in Germany. Thank
you. I think it would hit researchers a lot as well in non-COVID times, but that's definitely feasible. Any other questions or comments to Kai? I don't see any. So if not, maybe we can stop at this point. But once again, a big thank you for this very interesting presentation and also discussion. I think we've learned a lot, and definitely there is a scope for cooperation in what we do and what you do. So if whoever is willing to get in touch with Kai, I'm sure he will be very happy to answer whatever questions or requests, etc. So once again, thank you very much, Kai, and thank you to you all participants. See you next week, and Kai, see you sometime very soon. And since you are so close to ZEF, maybe you should just pass by.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity, and happy to get your emails, your requests, or meeting opportunities with you in Bonn here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Okay, it's only the three of us now.
Yes, let me close everything. Andreas, can I close already? Perfect. Thank you. Goodbye again.
Okay, bye-bye.